Towelgate. Daniel Cormier was a double champ, an Olympic wrestler, and one of the most respected men in MMA. But even he had a moment that didn't quite pass the smell test. UFC 210, Buffalo, New York. The day before his title defense against Anthony "Rumble" Johnson, Cormier stepped on the scale and came in at 206.2 pounds, a full pound over the championship limit. He looked flustered, shook his head, walked off. 2 minutes later, he returned, this time naked behind a towel held up by his team. He stepped on the scale again. Now it read 205.0. On the dot, no sweat, no sauna, no cut, just gone. The footage didn't lie. Cormier's hands were lightly gripping the towel, pressing down, subtly shifting weight away from the scale. It wasn't dramatic, but it was clear enough. A quiet physics trick, like watching a magician palm a coin, then swear it disappeared. At the time, Cormier denied everything. The New York State Athletic Commission shrugged it off. The fight went on. He submitted Rumble in round 2 and retained his belt. But years later, Cormier finally admitted it. During his Hall of Fame speech, he cracked a smile and said, "I may have grabbed the towel in Buffalo." The crowd laughed. He owned it. But the internet had already branded it Towelgate. The memes flew. The gifs never stopped. And while the incident didn't erase his legacy, it became part of it, like a footnote in fine print at the bottom of a golden resume. In a career built on control, one slip of the towel revealed something else. How far even the best will go to keep a belt. The Exemption. UFC 200 was falling apart. Conor McGregor had pulled out. John Jones got flagged just days before the card. The UFC needed a headliner fast, so they made a call to Brock Lesnar. Lesnar hadn't fought in over 4 years. He was deep into his WWE run, considered semi-retired from MMA. But the UFC saw an opportunity. Bring the beast back, sell pay-per-views, and save the event. They bent the rules to make it happen. Under normal anti-doping policy, returning fighters need to be in the USADA testing pool for 4 months before competing, but Brock got a pass. He officially signed with the UFC on June 3rd and entered the testing pool June 6th, just a month before UFC 200. USADA said it was fine. The UFC claimed Lesnar qualified as a new signee, not a returning vet. Technically, they were right. Ethically, it was a different story. Lesnar was tested 8 times in the span of 4 weeks, more than most active fighters get in 6 months. On fight night, he out-wrestled Mark Hunt for 3 rounds and took home a dominant unanimous decision. The payday, $2.5 million, the biggest disclosed check in UFC history at the time. And then, the walls collapsed. 10 days before the fight, Lesnar had already failed a drug test, but the results didn't come back until after the fight. Then he failed again from a second sample taken the night of the event. The substance was clomiphene, a banned estrogen blocker commonly used to mask steroid use or recover after a cycle. The win was overturned. The UFC ruled it a no contest. Lesnar was suspended for a year and fined $250,000, but by then he was already gone, back to pro wrestling, beltless, untouched. Mark Hunt was furious. He sued Lesnar, Dana White, and the UFC, accusing them of knowingly allowing a juiced-up fighter into the cage. Hunt argued the exemption wasn't just special treatment, it was corporate fraud. The lawsuit dragged for years, got dismissed, then partially revived, and was finally thrown out again in 2023. Hunt was ordered to pay part of the UFC's legal fees. The kiss. At UFC 306, Merab Dvalishvili did something no fighter had done in a UFC title fight. He kissed his opponent midway through round 2 while riding Sean O'Malley's back in a grappling exchange. Dvalishvili leaned in and pressed his lips against the back of O'Malley's neck. The crowd froze. So did the commentary. The moment was so surreal, referee Herb Dean had to pause and say words no official ever expected to need. Don't kiss him. Dvalishvili didn't deny it. After the fight, he explained it was a mental tactic, an attempt to assert dominance, get inside O'Malley's head, and make a statement. He said it wasn't disrespect, it was dominance. I was showing him who's the boss, he told reporters. That's why I kissed him. Dana White's response was deadpan. Weird. I don't know what that was. And maybe that's the point. This wasn't a brawl or a foul. It was a middle school mind game and the biggest fight of the year. The kiss was only one part of it. The rest was suffocation. 5 rounds of smothering pressure, takedowns, mat returns, and control. Merab didn't knock O'Malley out, he drowned him slowly. O'Malley had his moments, but by the end the scorecards were clear. 49, 46, 48, 47, 48, 47. A new bantamweight champion was crowned. O'Malley, ever the showman, took it in stride, but said that was gross and left the octagon shaking his head. But the kiss overshadowed the grind. The moment went viral. Some laughed, some were confused, some thought it crossed a line. UFC 232. John Jones was back. After a 15-month suspension for a failed drug test, he was set to return against Alexander Gustafsson at UFC 232. A long-awaited rematch scheduled for Las Vegas. Fight week arrived. The posters were up. Fans had already landed in Nevada. Then, everything collapsed. Just 6 days before the event, the Nevada State Athletic Commission refused to license Jones. Not because he failed a new drug test, but because he still had trace amounts of turnabble, the same banned substance he'd tested positive for in 2017, lingering in his system. USADA said it wasn't a new ingestion. They called it a pulsing effect. Scientists backed the idea. Nevada wasn't convinced. With the holidays approaching, they said they needed more time to evaluate. They wouldn't clear Jones to fight, so Dana White made a move no one saw coming. He relocated the entire event. UFC 232 was moved from Las Vegas to Los Angeles on less than a week's notice. California had previously licensed Jones. They reviewed the same data and approved him almost immediately. The card stayed intact. The venue changed. Overnight, fighters, teams, and fans were told to rebook flights, switch hotels, and move training camps across state lines. It was chaos. Fighters on the card lost money. Some couldn't bring full corners. Others had family locked out by the sudden travel shift. One fighter, Megan Anderson, called it disrespectful. Another said, "It'll cost us. It won't cost John." It didn't. Jones fought Gustafsson at the Forum in Inglewood and dominated. TKO in round 3. He reclaimed the light heavyweight belt and walked away clean. But the message was clear. When a star is big enough, the rules bend. TRT Vitor. There was a time when Vitor Belfort looked more comic book than fighter. Between 2012 and 2014, he wasn't just winning, he was finishing top contenders in ways that didn't make sense. Head kicks on repeat, speed and power levels that felt chemically unreal, and that's because in a way, they were. Vitor was fighting under TRT, or testosterone replacement therapy, a then legal performance enhancer approved by both the UFC and athletic commissions for fighters with clinically low testosterone. The idea was medical balance. The reality was something closer to biological warfare. At UFC on FX7, Belfort head-kicked Michael Bisping so clean it ruptured the retina in Bisping's right eye. The damage lingered. Multiple surgeries followed. Bisping would eventually lose permanent vision in one eye. Then came Luke Rockhold, another spinning heel kick, another finish, then Dan Henderson, another head kick knockout, his first ever. The streak was historic, but the optics were off. Photos of TRT Vitor went viral. Bodybuilder frame, shredded beyond recognition, vascular to the bone. Fighters started asking the same question. If TRT was meant to restore a baseline, why did it make Vitor look like a Marvel villain? Rockhold said fighters with past steroid suspensions shouldn't be allowed TRT exemptions. Dana White, initially neutral, called TRT a way for people to cheat and promised to test the living ST out of those using it. Bisping, years later, called Belfort a massive cheater, even as he congratulated him on his UFC Hall of Fame induction. Analysts called the therapy self-inflicted, a cover-up for past damage caused by previous cycles. Others argued it created an uneven battlefield. Older fighters turned superhuman, while clean opponents paid the price. In 2014, the Nevada Commission banned it. The UFC followed. Vitor had to cycle off, and when he returned, he looked like a different person. Softer frame, slower pace. He fought Chris Weidman for the middleweight title at UFC 187. Weidman ran through him in under 3 minutes. TRT Vitor vanished. What was left looked ordinary. Charles Stripp. At UFC 274, Charles Oliveira walked in as the reigning lightweight champion, but before the fight even began, the belt was gone. He stepped on the scale at official weigh-ins and came in at 155.5 pounds, half a pound over the championship limit. Under commission rules for a title defense, even half a pound is disqualifying. The result was immediate. Oliveira was stripped. The title was declared vacant, but something didn't add up. Charles had weighed himself multiple times the night before on a digital scale in his hotel room. It read 155 flat. His nutritionist, strength coach, and team all confirmed he was on weight. Then within hours, the official scale showed him over. And it wasn't just Charles. Multiple fighters on the same card reported similar discrepancies. Featherweights and flyweights alike missed by exactly 0.5 pounds. Rumors spread fast. Someone had tampered with the scale. UFC insiders later confirmed that the digital scale had been recalibrated, likely by fighters or cornermen from overseas who weren't familiar with how it worked. It wasn't illegal, but it was enough to throw off the entire weigh-in system. The Arizona Commission didn't care. There were no allowances. Charles made weight an hour later on a second attempt, but the rulebook was clear. Only fighters who make weight on the first attempt can fight for the title. The champion was now just a contender. He entered the octagon the next night without a belt and submitted Justin Gaethje in the first round. It didn't matter. The win didn't count as a title defense. The belt remained vacant. UFC 151 canceled. It was supposed to be John Jones versus Dan Henderson, UFC 151, Las Vegas, title on the line. But 10 days out, Henderson tore his MCL. The fight was off. The UFC scrambled. They offered Chael Sonnen as a late replacement. Sonnen accepted immediately. No training camp, no hesitation. But John Jones said no. With no main event, Dana White made the call. UFC 151 was canceled. The first pay-per-view event in company history to be completely scrapped. The reaction was instant and brutal. Fighters on the undercard who had trained for months lost their paychecks. Sponsors pulled out. Fans lost money on travel and hotels. Dana White blamed Greg Jackson, Jones' coach, calling him a sport killer. He accused Jones of being selfish, of costing dozens of fighters their income. Jones defended the decision. He said taking on a new opponent with no time to prepare wasn't smart or fair, but the damage was done. The UFC rescheduled the fight with Sonnen for UFC 159 the following year. Jones won by TKO, but the reputation hit lingered. 5 years. Nick Diaz never played by the rules, and in 2015, that nearly cost him his career. At UFC 183, Diaz fought Anderson Silva in a highly anticipated return. He lost by decision, but weeks later, the headlines weren't about the fight. They were about a drug test. Diaz had tested positive for marijuana metabolites. It was his third time getting flagged for cannabis use in Nevada, and the Nevada State Athletic Commission came down hard. Too hard. They handed Diaz a 5-year suspension and fined him $165,000, a punishment more severe than what most fighters received for actual performance-enhancing drugs. The room gasped. Reporters were stunned. Even Anderson Silva, who also failed a drug test for multiple anabolic steroids that same night, received just a 1-year suspension. The backlash was immediate. Fans, fighters, media, nearly the entire MMA world called it what it was: a hit job, unfair, vindictive, absurd. A Change.org petition to lift the suspension quickly passed 100,000 signatures. UFC fighters like Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor publicly defended Diaz. Dana White, never a friend of Nick's, even admitted the punishment was insane. At the hearing, one commissioner told Diaz, "Your lawyers were very persuasive, but you don't respect us." It wasn't about weed, it was about authority, and Nick had embarrassed theirs for too long. Eventually, the pressure worked. The suspension was reduced to 18 months, and the fine was cut to $100,000, but Diaz had already lost another prime year. He wouldn't fight again for 6. The fix. James Krause was a respected figure in MMA, UFC veteran, coach, analyst. Then in 2022, he became the face of one of the biggest betting scandals in UFC history. It started with a fight between Derek Minner and Shailen Nurdanbieke at UFC Vegas 64. Minner was injured going in, his leg compromised before the opening bell. He threw a single kick, winced, and seconds later the fight was over. But something was off. In the hours leading up to the fight, there was a massive spike in betting volume, all on Nurdanbieke to win in the first round. Sportsbooks flagged it as suspicious. The odds had moved drastically in just minutes. Then came the investigation. Minner was coached by James Krause. Krause ran a private Discord server where he shared betting picks, sometimes charging members for access. He publicly bragged about making more money betting on fights than he ever did coaching or competing. He even bet on UFC events himself. That was all the commission needed to hear. The UFC suspended Krause and banned any fighter training under him from competing. The Discord server was shut down. Krause vanished from the scene, and it didn't stop there. In 2025, flyweight Jeff Molina, one of Krause's top students, was suspended for 3 years. Investigators discovered Molina knew about Minner's injury before the fight and failed to report it. That alone violated UFC policy and commission law. Molina, who had once called Krause his mentor, became collateral damage. As for Krause, he later told media he was millions in debt and trying to pivot into real estate. The federal investigation is still active, no criminal charges yet, but the damage is done. Fight of the Night Oversight. UFC 318 New Orleans. The main event, Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier, a 5-round war between two legends and Poirier's final fight. From the first bell, it was electric. Holloway rocked Poirier early. Later, Poirier nearly locked in a choke that could have ended the fight. They stood toe-to-toe in the 5th, bleeding, bruised, all grit. When the decision came, Holloway retained his BMF title via unanimous verdict, 49, 47-49, 47-48, 47. But in the tight press room backstage, the real shock came from what shouldn't have happened. When bonuses were announced, the Fight of the Night award, the $50,000 incentive, didn't go to Holloway or Poirier. It went to a preliminary bout, Brendan Allen versus Marvin Vettori. Holloway's reaction captured the mood. How the hell did we not get Fight of the Night? That's some bullshit. Let's go tell Dana. Poirier was equally stunned, repeating, "We didn't get it?" "No, it's some bullshit," Holloway responded. The MMA world erupted online. Many called it a travesty, arguing the main event was the highlight of the entire night. Poirier, a decorated veteran, would have set the record for most FOTN awards with number 11, outranking everyone. Now he'd remain tied. Fans and fighters alike voiced frustration. Holloway confronted reporters live, demanding answers, visibly upset at being overlooked. The Scorecard. The Octagon has seen knockouts, submissions, and upsets, but nothing causes more chaos than the judges' scorecards. Some decisions don't just confuse fans, they fracture trust. Start with UFC 104, Lyoto Machida versus Mauricio Shogun Rua. 5 rounds. Rua chopped at Machida's legs, landed body kicks, pushed the pace. Nearly every media outlet scored it for Rua, but the judges gave it to Machida, unanimous. The crowd booed. Dana White later admitted, "I had it 4-1 Shogun." A rematch was booked. Rua knocked Machida out in the first round. Then there's Leonard Garcia versus Nam Fan at the TUF 12 finale. Fan outstruck Garcia for all 3 rounds, mixed in bodywork, stayed composed. Commentators were already congratulating him mid-broadcast. The decision, Garcia by split. The reaction, stunned silence, then outrage. Bisping versus Hamill. Sanchez versus Campman. Henderson versus Edgar II. GSP versus Johnny Hendricks, each added to the pile. Inconsistent criteria, regional bias, and outdated boxing standards left fighters wondering what mattered more, damage, volume, or control. UFC tried to update the judging criteria in 2017, placing greater emphasis on effective striking and impact, but change has been slow. Commissions still vary, judging remains subjective, fighters plan for knockouts, fans pray for clarity, and every time a close fight goes the wrong way, old ghosts resurface.